Well, hello and welcome to Mystic Brew. I am Radagast. I don't even know what to call this. I haven't done a Mystic Brew, I guess, in a week. My last Mystic Brew ended up creating reverberations. And took me some time to try to understand them. And I did make a video. I did make one of the first one of what I guess I'm going to call kind of a personal stock video. I had in the in the forum I belong to, the One Truth forum. I have an ongoing thread called the Roscoble Tent a Tot. Roscoble was the area or where Radagast lived in Middle Earth. And although he lived in a hut, I pitched a cyber tent. It's been going for a couple of years now, and has for a humble forum, it is well viewed. So, and there was a number of I post a lot of things about Gnostic or Sophianic narrative. And just to me, just Earth consciousness, Gaian consciousness, Gaia as a living entity to to be dealt with, to be loved, to get loved back from. It's a we. It's not a her and us, so much as it is a we once you connect to it. And there are certain personages on a Gnostic scene, and to speak about Gnostics without mentioning John Lamb Lash would be to ignore who kind of brought who kind of resurrected, for lack of a better word occurring to me at the moment, the Gnostic traditions and their deep antiquity, as opposed to many of the people like Elaine Pagels, who, from what I know of, is a Christian, who was interpreting the Gnostics from the Nag Hammadi text, which I don't know how often I've said it here, but I certainly said it in my other video, the one I didn't publish publicly, that the Nag Hammadi text, although they maintain some of the vein, that vein of deep understanding that came out of antiquity, it's at that time it's starting to suffer from an attempt, some syncretism, and an attempt to work with the emerging systems that we're not treating people who chose differently very kindly, to put it mildly. And especially after the Council of Nicaea, when Christianity really became a Roman system, and heresies were, which again, the original word for heresy is to choose. Well, now once you have a system like this, to choose incorrectly. There was in old traditions, if you choose incorrectly, you would bear bad fruit from whatever your misconceptions where they led you. Now there was this, especially with the Council of Nicaea and the codification of what Christianity was, to choose differently could create very bad ramifications. So, and then of course, much less egregious was we'll call it the Hebrew system and the Torah, but they were kept more to themselves. Once they kind of eliminated the competition in their given, what they called their promised land, they kind of were self-contained and really on their own, and were not really seen as a threat because they were insular and they kept to themselves. So, that was all good. to the more ancient traditions that were not existing in their on the contracted land that they got from Jehovah. And so there is an understanding of what being a Gnostic. I won't use the word Gnosticism, although in certain cases John Lash does use the word, and in some of if I have any issue with him is him turning a tradition into an ism. I'm not comfortable with any isms. I embrace the Tao, but I wouldn't call myself a Taoist. I'm very comfortable with the word Gnostic, which is a system, or actually a tradition based on gnosis, or direct communion with the divine as one is able. And then with the mysteries, you had people who had kind of made really strong connections, and some of them involved special preparations with ethnogens, but unique ethnogens that helped with mystical states. And mushrooms have been a big part of that. And then, of course, in the Amazon jungle, ayahuasca, and in certain cases, a little addition of datura, just different ways of getting some DMT to flow so that one can have access to the extra, the non-physical world of which we are a part of in our multi-dimensional bodies through our chakra system. And also that although we might not be able to see that part, they can see and do interact with us. So there were certain plant medicines that were given by the Creator so that people could interact with that what we the above the natural world, the other the higher vibrations, which often gets called the supernatural. And if you understand what it means, what supernatural, above the natural, in other words, another form of what is natural, except the unseen natural part, that it was that to at least have some kind of regular meetings. Now, whether those would be weekly, monthly, yearly, whatever, but you needed some kind of interface because it's all coordinated. And so the mysteries were based on that. Of course, the mysteries also had their practicality. Masonry is a form of how to work stone. It's a skill. Metallurgy was a skill. Metallurgy for energetic reasons, making plows and other things. The making of weaponry was a form of metallurgy in its fuckery applications. And of course, once one group makes weapons, then if you do not make weapons, it just it's an ugly spiral. And I just finished reading Graham Hancock's book Entangled, which is about a 21st century woman interacting with a woman 24,000 years ago in Spain, during a time that the Neanderthals were still alive, and her mixing in with the Neanderthals, finding allies with them, how they taught her. And matter of fact, they had certain mushrooms they called the little teachers. And in her own tradition, there was a time when they did it, but then there came a time when they were considered, they would turn people into demons, and to talk about them or to use them was punishable by death in her clan. Ooh, do I smell the demiurge at work. And so it was a fascinating read. Gave me some pretty interesting connections to make, and I was talking with another friend of mine who's kind of my partner in working with the noosphere, and I had gotten one portion of well, it was kind of a signal to me, and he brought me another portion, which is why I like to share my own understandings and micro gnosis of certain things, and put them out with people who kind of travel a similar path with me. Or yeah, not it's kind of with me because we exchange information and we enrich each other. Um, it's kind of like two people walking along a forest path, and each one is looking for what they want to see. There's some shared visions, but there's also some very subjective interpretations of the same environment, and then the exchange of information is enriching, and I love that. Um, but because he was hiding, I shouldn't say hiding, inserting what would be kind of like greater some knowledge that is probably important to have, especially about the Neanderthals. But it was a knowledge that has been emerging, and something that I got as a genetic, let's call it upload or insertion, because of my own portion of Neanderthal blood through my French side of my family, which is about 3/4 of that. And but because I guess it's written as fiction, so it has to kind of have a flow to carry the story. Oh my God, was it have some graphic scenes of nastiness? Um, and the fight scenes were quite graphic. I mean, I won't even give instances from it. I'm quite sure a lot of people would love it. Um, that kind of stuff, because you know people who still go to movies basically get treated the same way. And if a movie doesn't kind of gross you out with all of its depictions of violence, then I'm quite sure Graham Hancock's Entangled would not be disturbing. For me, a lot of times I just had to skip over certain scenes because they weren't pertinent to the story. They were the carriers of the emotional, I guess, engagement of the reader into the story. But I'm not looking. My emotional engagement actually comes from when I have pieces of information that touch me deep, and then I have an emotional reaction to the data. That's the kind of emotion I like. I don't really like to have my emotion crafted for me, but that's me, and that's the odd person that I am, and that's what makes me a little bit of a weird fit in almost any community. I love people, and they seem to love me back, but it can get a little bit. Well, I guess misunderstanding is the key word. It's always a misunderstanding, and it is what it is. So what did I write here? I'm not going to make. I just kind of decided. I realized that I hadn't made a Mystic Brew in a while. I'm going later on this evening. I am speaking with somebody that we're talking about doing one together, and I hope that comes off. I think it should be interesting, especially with regards to the concept of community. And I guess going forward, I probably shouldn't talk about community unless I have another community member. Apparently, going it alone, riffing on community by yourself, is fraught with some perils. At least for me. Um, Us Aspies do not read community well, because it's about cross signaling, and it's just it can be tricky. I've experienced it all my life. It's nothing new. It's a what so. It's I have my understandings and in certain ways coping mechanisms. But anyway, I hope to have a community member with me on making a Mystic Brew on Friday. I have a bunch of stuff written here. I mean, one of the things with regarding to, like, let's say things that would be very useful is the cannabis species. And that includes hemp, the industrial plant, and the more psychoactive parts of that family. And how, I guess it was in 1937, or this guy, Harry Anslinger, and they had the Marijuana Tax Act, and that's when people started getting arrested for an herb that has been around for tens of thousands of years, and just like any of the other many plants, there are different strains that are made by natural genetic modification, as has been the case of, creating different strains through natural pollination techniques, not going inside, not sticking needles and doing weird science within it. Like there's science, genetically modification, as far as like kind of a technology, with white coats, and you got to watch out for infection and all the rest of this stuff. And then, how we have avocados. If you notice, it's different. There's those big green avocados, and then there's called the Hass avocado. Well, the Hass avocado was an adaptation. And Luther Burbank was huge. He grew roses without thorns. I think he even got cactus without thorns, and he did that by talking to them and giving them encouragement, saying you don't need the thorns, and then they didn't grow the thorns. He used a kind of a higher form of communicating with the intelligence of the plant, the deva of the plant, the spirit of the plant. Luther Burbank, just fascinating scientist. And so anyway, with regard to hemp, we have all this state by state stuff. And I just thought, just to throw it out there, and not even to expand on it, because you can Google it and get your own stuff, because it's dry, it's boring. But around 1937, and then I guess there was a slight allowing for the growth during the war, and then they brought the prohibition back. And I'm a little bit tied in with alcohol, but when alcohol, I mean, it's just a mess. To pull apart the history is, to me, to waste all of our time, because you can read it and I won't misinterpret it or get emotional about it, because I do get upset when I read fuckery, which is what that is, because it's an intercession between us and nature. The only reason I think it would be useful for people to see it is, for me, instead of all this state by state stuff, whatever this act is, to me, if we're going to tell our congressman anything, it's just repeal that act. Let's do a reset, okay? That was a bad idea, and just enough already. Let us grow what we want in our fields, in our yards. Even in pilot programs here in Virginia, if you grow hemp, the DEA is still involved, because you need to track for the leaves. You're allowed to use the seeds, you're allowed to use the stalks, but the leaves had to be accounted for. Talk about a waste of all our time. And part of that support seems to be, Harry Anslinger kind of, the devil's weed. He went after all those boogeymen of Bible-based people. So there's always been kind of a strong support against marijuana or anything like it. And that's the other thing, is the conflation of hemp with the psychoactive. Again, counting on the people who have no need to be that informed. They don't really have it. You don't need to be a botanist, okay? But he took advantage of the fact that the average person isn't a botanist, and conflated hemp with the psychoactive, let's call it marijuana, and just made it all bad. No difference, and to me, even a difference is none of anybody's business. But in case anybody runs into people who, let's say, are churchgoers, I would just point them at that early point in Genesis, because they're gonna, that's kind of an important book to them, and to show where, God gave all the green seed-bearing plants to humanity to use for, food and I guess curing. I forget, the whole thing, but they were given to us. So in many ways, rather than kind of casting the plant itself as the demon, we have to look at the lawmakers as the true demons, the ones who would step between creation and the created, and their use of what was created and given to them, especially in the Bible scenario. It's in I mean, it doesn't even have to be discussed in traditional things. I mean, obviously, you put on a planet, it's your stuff. That's why, I mean, it's why we're here. I mean, that's like a big duh. But for some reason, in the creation of the more modern systems, there was like, you can use this. Okay, so I just think that that's useful for a lot of people who might be encountering people, church-going people who go, oh no, that, demons and stuff like that, and then just kind of point them there, and it's clearing the psychological space is one thing to allowing even state by state for this to happen. But I really feel just at the federal level, while we still have all these levels and systems, it's just like, get rid of this. This was always stupid. Get rid of it. And that's something that people through their congressmen and senators can say, get rid of that act, that the Marijuana Tax Act, whatever. Just look up Harry Anslinger. That was his name, and you'll Ann Slinger, A-N Slinger. Okay, like you sling something. And just get, if I have a passion for it, and I just one of the ways to make noise is through your representatives, and again, there's all kinds of ways of trying to figure out how they can benefit. Right now, they can tax it, so there's an incentive for them. Where there's money, there's an incentive. So and also it's funny, I'd come up with a word because I realized that sometimes the Safayan narrative, or even the Gnostic Nag Hammadi text, is just, especially, like I said, the Nag Hammadi texts are a tradition from antiquity struggling with a ferocious modern system. Not a very tolerant system, complete with a jealous God. So I had come up with a concept of eco-noetic, and I figured somebody has already had to do that, and I found somebody, but and I kind of used the term, but as far as expounding on it, wasn't much there. And for me, an eco-noetic is kind of like an engaging your mind with the ecosystem. And then, because to engage the ecosystem, even like, just to kind of go at, like, like you might study botany, or, any number of science aspects of nature. If you pay attention to nature, even from the noetic or intellectual level, although noetic comes from noesis, which is also ultimately where gnosis comes from. So noesis can lead to gnosis. I've always been a kind of an intellectual, especially when I was younger, before the heavy mysticism kicked in, and I often found that when I would start something very left-brained, but as you kind of almost fall into the altered state of dissection and looking at it, and that altered state kind of opens up the other side, and all of a sudden all kinds of ahas and intellectual dots get connected. And next thing you know, you're no longer in that dry intellectual world. You've kind of, like almost like Alice in Wonderland, you've spilled into this other world. And we would benefit so much from studying nature, working with nature, and letting nature talk to us. Because once the voice of nature starts to speak to you, you realize there's a lot there. And this way here, people can have their own gnosis instead of being told about gnosis. And this is a narrative that the Gnostics use and whatever. I mean, a lot of I see a lot. Although I see more and more people really embracing it because they actually connect into it. And once they make that connection, they're like, this is it. I mean, that's what happened with me. But there's a lot of people who have already, they kind of have the systems, their belief systems that, and that's the difference. Gnosis is knowing. A belief system is a belief or a faith but it's kind of how the systems were built. I mean, the big three systems in the Western world are systems of faith, not gnosis, and that's why they have a priesthood, because the priesthood has to make sure that if you start to waver on your faith, they're well trained to kind of build it up, or if they can't build up their faith, to bring those parts of their faith that have that fear factor of, whoa, strain could get you in a lot of trouble. So, because they're systems, and they're control systems. Because the only system on this planet that is not a control system is the ecosystem, the natural system. All other systems are to control something, some resource, and the primary resource is us. Because again, when even if they find whether it's gold or oil, do you think the ones who are going to like own that are out there getting greasy and stuff? Maybe in the old days, but these days, no, it's going to be the little people that are going to do the dirty work. So the systems are about control, but the ecosystem is about abundance. It's about how to work with it, because it gives and gives and gives, and it loves and it loves and it loves. And it doesn't ask for anything, but if you want to get a little bit more out of it, you need to work with it, and that's how you kind of get a better return on of the investment of your time, by knowing how to work with it and tweak it and get a little bit more than would ordinarily be the same. And by understanding nature in that way is how you start doing that beautiful dance with nature. I'm only up to 26 minutes here. So I just, like, even water. We have so much polluted water on this planet. And it doesn't have to be that way, and water is more than just a drink. Water carries memory. If you know the work of Dr. Emoto, and I showed a little bit of it, water is so crucial, and very often the consciousness of water, the importance of water. I mean, there's whole meditations on water. So like I got like written knowing about water, knowing what water is, all about water. I mean, there's a way of connecting to the earth, and just seeing the damage that's been done to the water. How the original plan was all fresh water that moved was drinkable. That was how the creation was set out for us. That we would have lots and endless amounts of drinkable water if you didn't live in the desert. And even there, people would find oases. So any poisoning of that system is very simply demonic. And so there's just a lot to think about with regard to this. And I wrote sovereign to sovereign. I wrote a lot of stuff, but a simple connection. Earth as a living being, a simple connection. And then the shared traditions instead of systems. And that's what you have. Kind of before you have the organized religions, you had traditions. And traditions were not hard codified. You might have a teacher who, within a tradition that said, you must do it this way, you must do it this way, because that's how they understood it. And it's almost like a jazz musician. Once you learn theory and structure, well, then you can kind of step outside, because you know the rules you're breaking. And I shouldn't say the rules, the ways, the structure. You know the structure that you're messing with, so that you can do it in a playful kind of way. All right, this is really like a hello, how are you all doing out there? I've spent so much of my time between reading and then the mystic states that have been coming, because these are some incredible times that we're having here. And and I've just been spending a lot of time in a very disassociated state, beautiful, loving it, and then when I emerge into and associated with the world, the state, not the earth, but the world. The disassociated state is more a connection with the earth, the associated with a outside world is this system thing, and it's been increasingly an uncomfortable transition for me, and I'm trying to make that transition from that state, into like being able to make videos, and I actually struggle. I'm struggling to do it in a way that is sharing, is loving, doesn't sound remotely preachy, because that's not where I come from. But I do come from a passion of what I've experienced, and want to share that. But there were certain understandings that I think help with correction. I mean, there's a lot of correction that needs to be done if we ever want to get back, or even get back, forward. Because if time is cyclical, and so kind of getting back by moving forward, but understanding that what that what kind of like what this, at least the smell of it is, what it smells like, what it feels like, how it nurtures us. So anyway, I will. I don't know if I'm going to make an announcement video prior to if I do this Friday video, but I will know by this evening. And so yeah, I'm sorry if this was one of my more disjointed ones. I apologize. Again, I'm spending a lot of time in a disassociated state, so to kind of pull it together and produce something of coherence in words. And also, again, after my last Mystic Brew and some of the echoes that came back to me, it was at least temporarily traumatizing, and that shocking, a little shocking actually. A learning moment for me, how to better navigate the psychological terrain of others. And so I guess that's it. So leave it here. Hello all, and I feel lots of love, both from the earth and outwards to all the rest of the anthropines out there. And I just don't. I'm just trying to figure out if I have anything useful actually to provide. I don't know. Maybe I don't have anything useful. And so I'm just gonna say hello, share some thoughts. Hopefully they're not too rambling. So stay sane. Look for love. Give love. Actually, just give love, and I watch it just kind of bounce back on you. And until next, I guess I'll just say goodbye, and I'll see you later.